Mr. President, as I begin this morning, I want to take a moment to address the events that transpired yesterday just a few short blocks from where we're standing. The summer months are busy tourist months here in our nation's capital, and for some, the view from Union Station is the very first sight they have of Washington, D.C. Those who emerged from Union Station yesterday afternoon, however, were confronted not with the beauty of the historic station, but with a scene of lawlessness. Violent protesters tore down American flags that fly in front of Union Station, lit at least one of them on fire, and raised Palestinian flags in their place. Others defiled the monuments in front of the station with messages including, and I quote, "Hamas is coming," and "globalize the Intifada." Now imagine being a Jewish person walking to work past those slogans. Mr. President, we have a proud tradition of public protest in the United States. But there is a difference between exercising free speech rights and the vandalism and violence that we saw yesterday. In addition to what we saw in front of Union Station and elsewhere, an anti-Israel protester or protesters released hundreds of maggots and mealworms into the hotel where the Prime Minister and a lot of other people were staying. This is not part of the proud tradition of American political discourse. This is thuggery. Pure thuggery. And I'm frankly appalled by how little we have heard in response from Democrats. The President addressed the nation last night. Could he not have added a few words on this disturbing display? What about the Vice President? Every single public official and every single American should be united in condemning this violence and vandalism, as well as rhetoric that elevates terrorism and foments anti-Semitism. We are better than this, and it's time we started acting like it. Mr. President, I'm pleased to say that during a summer in which Democrats have focused on show votes, we're actually going to vote this week on a substantial piece of legislation called the Kids Online Safety Act. Senator Blackburn has done a tremendous amount of work to deliver a bill that will take real steps to mitigate the harm that social media can do to children. And I'm grateful for her leadership on this issue. The package before us also includes legislation from Senator Cassidy to update the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, and I applaud him for his work. I'm pleased also that my bipartisan Filter Bubble Transparency Act, which I introduced with Senator Blackburn and others, has been included in the final legislation. The Filter Bubble Transparency Act requires social media companies and other internet platforms to notify users that the content they are seeing has been selected for them by hidden algorithms, which create a unique universe of information for each user, a phenomenon that's often referred to as the filter bubble. Platforms would also be required to give users the choice to switch to a version of the platform that is filter bubble free. And I'm hopeful that along with the rest of the Kids Online Safety Act, this will provide a meaningful way to address some of the more problematic aspects of the internet. Mr. President, as I said, it's good to be voting on something substantial here in the Senate. We've done essentially nothing for 2 months other than vote on guaranteed to fail legislation that Democrats hope will somehow help them win votes in November. But voting on the Kids Online Safety Act is not enough. We have a lot more work we should be doing, starting with action on one of the most important pieces of legislation we consider each year, the National Defense Authorization Act. The Israeli Prime Minister's speech in Congress yesterday, a speech that a number of my Democrat colleagues and Vice President Harris chose to boycott, was a timely reminder of the dangerous world we face. Iran-backed terrorist organizations like Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis, fomenting terror and instability in the Middle East. An emboldened Russia engaged in a ground war against Ukraine on the doorstep of our NATO allies. An increasingly aggressive China and an increasingly endangered Taiwan. And the unfortunate truth, Mr. President, is that we are not as prepared as we should be to confront these threats. We have service branches struggling with recruitment. We have ships that can't sail and planes that can't fly because of maintenance issues. We have shortages of munitions. Our colleague, Senator Wicker, the ranking member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, recently put forward a blueprint for rebuilding our military. He points out that our defense budget as a share of the economy has fallen to near historic lows, hardly in line with the threats that we face today. And he proposes increasing the defense budget over the next few years alongside important reforms to put our military in a position of strength, not just now, but well into the future. It's a call that we need to heed. Last fall, the Strategic Posture Commission offered a disturbing assessment, and I quote, "Today, the United States is on the cusp of having not one, but two nuclear peer adversaries, each with ambitions to change the international status quo by force if necessary, a situation which the United States did not anticipate and for which it is not prepared." End quote. A situation which the United States did not anticipate and for which it is not prepared. That is a pretty disturbing analysis, Mr. President, and it underlines the absolute imperative of addressing our military readiness today. Which brings me to this year's National Defense Authorization Act. I'm grateful that our colleagues on the Armed Services Committee have put forward a bill that, while it does not authorize all the investment our military needs, does take steps to address the challenges that we're facing. This year's NDAA authorizes full funding for the European and Pacific deterrence initiatives and takes steps to strengthen our partnerships to counter Russia and China. It takes important steps to modernize our military and authorize financing for the technologies and weapons of tomorrow. And it authorizes the purchase of new ships, combat vehicles, and aircraft to update our aging fleets. I'm particularly pleased to report that this bill includes full funding for the next steps of the B-21 mission, including necessary support facilities. The Air Force calls the B-21 Raider, its new long-term strategic bomber, the future backbone of the bomber force. And I'm incredibly proud that this mission will be hosted at South Dakota's own Ellsworth Air Force Base. And one of my top priorities here in Congress is ensuring that the Air Force, and Ellsworth in particular, has everything it needs for this critical advancement in our nation's readiness. Mr. President, the Senate Armed Services Committee passed this year's National Defense Authorization Act on June 13th. And well over a month later, the Democrat leader still hasn't found time for this critical legislation, nor is there any indication of when he will. It says a lot about Democrats' priorities. But I hope that the Democrat leader will take a moment to consider that while he puts our defense on the back burner, our enemies are not delaying their ambitions or their aggressive activities. And I hope he will bring this important and consequential legislation to the floor in the very near future. Mr. President, I yield the floor.